everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Brittany Jones-Cooper, and we're going to spend the next 30 minutes talking about the dark side of high school cheerleading. Based on the acclaimed novel, Dare Me follows the fraught relationship between two best friends after a new coach arrives. And as tensions rise, secrets push the women to physical and psychological extremes. Please help me welcome showrunner Megan Abbott and stars Willa Fitzgerald and Taveeta Szymanowicz. Welcome, guys. I gotta start by saying I really love this show. I grew up in a time where we had like Mean Girls and Jawbreaker and all these like movies and shows that explored how complicated female dynamics are in high school, and I just really relate to them. I love them, and this gives me everything I love. So congrats. Megan, I know you wrote the book, Dare Me, which the show is based off of. So take me back to the beginning. Where did this idea come from to explore this darker side of competitive cheerleading?
I was seeing that cheer was very different than it was in my day, where it was much more about pom-poms and dancing and sort of the popular girls, but it had been sort of slowly turning into this hyper-competitive sport with these sort of daredevil feats that these young women would do. And it just seemed such a ripe sort of playground to explore how complicated young womanhood is, and to really sort of get into the aggressions and the competition and the ambition.
Yeah. And I know you wrote the book in 2012?
Yes.
So what was the journey like getting it to being a show?
It was a long one. I honestly, we've talked about this. I don't know if it would have been made then, but 2012 is really very ancient by today's standards. But at that time, there was not all this TV. It was in development for a feature film, and and then it slowly sort of migrated to TV, and then the last few years with things like Big Little Lies, there's just been shown that there's this appetite for complicated female characters, and then, turned out to be the perfect moment for the show.
I think too specifically for dark comedies. I feel like we're seeing more, and people are really looking for that because it's sort of explains life so much more fully, because there is humor, but then there's also just like these dark underbellies to a lot of things.
Yes, and how do you understand high school if not through that lens? It's a dark comedy, or occasionally veering into tragedy. But, yeah.
Thriller.
Yes,
Willa, you play Coach Colette, a woman who I don't think believes in boundaries.
I think she has a lot of boundaries.
Okay,
I think there are a lot of walls up, actually.
You take me through who Willa or who Colette is.
Whoa.
Extra boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that Colette is actually a deeply private and boundary-ridden human. But I think sometimes when you have so many kind of rules for your own self-regulation, things can get a little blurry when there's a situation that makes you feel more alive emotionally. And I think that that's certainly kind of what happens with Addie, why that's such a compelling relationship for her to explore.
And let's talk about, because the reason I said that is because she is this coach. She's a young woman. She's a young coach. Yeah. And so she sort of fits in with these girls. So how fun is it, or what was interesting about playing a woman who's in her 20s but still sort of like infiltrating this high school mentality and these relationships with these girls?
Yeah, I think it's it's interesting. I think that we're all quite close in age, relatively speaking. It's like less than a decade. And I think that it's also, even on set, less so when we were shooting like the gym scenes where Colette is more in her boss mode. But when we were shooting like the fun, house stuff, and then like not on set, I think it's very easy to just kind of meet people wherever they are. And I think that it's easy to understand how someone like Colette, who is a young coach, a young teacher in a high school, it's easy to kind of like slip into the sophomoric dynamics of the girls. And there's also something intoxicating about youth, especially as you're slipping out of it yourself, and perhaps without like a lot of desire to actually be in the situation that she's in, a mother, wife, choices that I don't think that she as an individual really consciously got to make. I think it was more just like the steps in her life.
And is that what is interesting for you to play? Because she really, each episode you peel back a layer and you start to see really who she is. Is that what was fascinating about taking on a character like Colette.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think from the pilot on, and then especially after I read the novel before we started shooting the pilot, Colette is a character who really is so slowly revealed. Even in this first season, it's such kind of a slow burn of revelation about who this person actually is. I think partially because Colette herself does not know who she actually is. And I think that that's also contributing to the slow burn revelation.
Exactly, and how she can get sucked back into this high school mentality so easily too.
Yeah, and those characters are usually the male characters, and we were so eager to have the woman be the mystery, you know, as opposed to the Don Draper or the Walter White, where he gets to be mysterious and you figure him out. We wanted to have the woman be that in that role, and that, you know, we would be leaning in and wanting to know more about her.
Yeah, and I think that was also so interesting from a character's perspective for all the girls on the squad, because she's this young, powerful woman, and she comes in and we idolize her. We want to be like her. So to have that to play with, and I think tying back to what you were saying before earlier about being so close in age, she is literally who we want to be in a couple of years. So it's interesting.
And let's talk about your character, because she's on the squad, and she's she just wants to be like in the crew, right?
Oh, yeah.
She just wants
She's
to be part of
fun.
the in crowd.
She's fun. Riri's really vibrant. I think she brings a lot of vibrancy to the show. As you guys can gather from now, she's very wild. But I think she's also a really good depiction of, you know, what can happen in a small town when there's not that much to do. And, you know, she also comes from, her mother is, you know, very hard on her, and so there's a lot of expectations on her, and being in that small town dealing with all that pressure, turning to the partying and to the wild nature to kind of use that as a release was really interesting. And she's really fun. Yeah.
And the two best friends, Addie and Beth, she's very much a part of that little
Yeah.
trio, and their dynamic is so interesting, and there's a lot of power shifts and a lot of manipulation, and she's just along
like
for the
a
ride.
pawn. She's like essentially she's a pawn in that relationship, and I think it's really interesting as the series goes on too. She becomes a source of information for both of them because she is a pawn, and also thus a source of information for the audience. So, yeah, it's fun.
Fun. It's very secretive, and
We can all identify with that moment in the first episode where Addie and Beth are fighting. So Beth demotes Addie to the back seat, and Riri gets shotgun.
She jumps right in there.
she doesn't question it. She's like, "Yep, my turn."
That's it. I'm going to enjoy it, and I'm going to make sure that Beth knows how much fun I can be in shotgun.
Yeah. Well, it's
So,
also
you
playing
know.
on the power dynamics between the squad too, because of, you know, if Beth is no longer Beth's best girl, I want to be her best girl, and it trickles down through the squad.
Let's talk about the cheerleading aspect of the show, because you guys are doing some real cheerleading there. You can see the physicality in it. So take me through just preparing the actors for that. Are there some cheerleading actors? Like, what is the group dynamic?
Yeah, it was, you know, we had this wonderful cheer coordinator, Amy Wright, who worked with us from the start, and she assembled this group. The squad is a mix of dancers and gymnasts and actor dancers, and that's how Taveeta came to us. But with very varying levels of skill when they started. Maybe you can talk about cheer camp a little bit.
Cheer camp was intense. So
An actual cheer camp.
We had actual cheer camps.
Wow.
We had about 2 weeks before shooting started of genuine cheer camp. And I grew up a dancer, so I thought going into it, I was like, oh, this is going to be easy. It was hard. The athleticism that goes into cheerleading is incredible, and the real cheerleaders that we had on the squad, they're phenomenal. So to only have 2 weeks to try to work up to that caliber on that level was really, it was really challenging. But at the end of the day, we got there, and it's really gratifying. And we created just a spectacular bond as a squad.
It's like Saving Private Ryan when they made all the actors go to boot camp. I feel like this was our version of that.
No, we would wake up, go straight to cheer camp, have really intense warm-ups and just jump drills, and then go right into basing, which is essentially lifting humans with your hands, over and over again for 14 days, and it was great.
Did you have any battle scars or any stories out
I
of
was so
cheer camp?
sore.
Yeah. Did anybody get hurt? I mean, these are athletes. That's what you do come to realize, is that cheerleading has turned into this full kind of contact athletic sport. So
Yeah.
were there any injuries in cheer camp, or anybody really getting the reality check of like, oh, this is a real thing?
Certainly some minor injuries. I feel like most of the real injuries were during party scenes. It's a little more riotous and there. But I would think it was always fun for Willa too, because she got to be this sort of taskmaster walking around while we're doing this stuff, and you're sort of the cool customer, which was great for the dynamic for the actors too, right?
Yeah, I had the fun job of just having to look like I had done all of that stuff and not actually having to do it, which was honestly sad. I was so bummed. I was like, I can't believe that. I was like watching them like learn all these fun dances and like it was really
But having you there, like Willa came to cheer camp sometimes, and having her there was honestly quite amazing, because she would walk in and we'd be like, oh, that's our coach. Like we'd be in it right away. Like as she was walking
also
around.
for the pilot, I was there every day, all day for the cheer camp to see Amy working with the girls, to see kind of what her dynamic was with people, and also just to kind of start learning who was on the squad, because it's a large group of people, and it was funny because I was just watching in the corner. Like people didn't even necessarily like know who I was for a second there.
Yeah. You're already creating that like power dynamic.
It's all about mind games.
Exactly. The mind games are so crazy. We also get to see the interior life of cheerleaders. So I want to know what sort of research did you do? Because you guys sort of kind of talk about the negative parts that can exist, whether it's eating disorders or some of the intimidation or the body image pressure that some girls may feel. So what sort of research did you do to sort of like get into the mind?
Yeah, for early on for the book and then in development for the series, I did talk to a lot of cheerleaders, and the thing that always impressed me was the sort of bravado and fearlessness, and they would show me their scars, and sometimes they would lift up their shirts and show me where they had spinal surgery because they'd fallen, but they were so proud of it, and that that has all kinds of troubling consequences too, of course, but there was something so wonderful about it because it sort of defies this expectation of the cheerleader as this bouncy, sort of vapid, essentially sort of flipping herself around carelessly, when it's really this sort of really serious risk-taking sport. But then once on the show, we would be able to get constant feedback from the cheerleaders who were on our squad and the gymnasts and the dancers, and talk about the toll it took, but also the pleasures. I mean, it was a constant conversation as we shot the show, wouldn't you say?
No, absolutely. Like we had some really long nights specifically shooting cheer stuff, and I think it was hard, but at the end of it, we all came out feeling really fulfilled, and we pushed ourselves to that point where pain becomes pleasure, where it's like 3 a.m. and we're constantly doing all this athletic stuff, and you just take a deep breath and you're like, oh, this actually feels good right now. This is great.
That pain to pleasure thing is a theme in the show, which it's interesting that you guys were sort of pushed to actually feel that in real life. And you sort of get into the mindset, I think, maybe a little bit. I'm interested for you, your character is so fascinating to me because of just how well she plays with the drama with these two characters. So what is so interesting about exploring those female dynamics? Because we talked about how these young girls are pushed to certain extremes and you're playing their coach. And what is just so interesting about playing those power dynamics? Because it is fascinating to watch it play out.
Well, I mean, I think that this is also kind of following up on the question that you just asked about cheerleading itself. I think that there's something that is kind of highlighted or magnified about just the dynamics of high school, like through the lens of competitive sport, because there is like an underlying just competitive do or die stakes of high school, sociology. And I think that when you throw into the mix like a young coach who, as a coach has kind of a different relationship with the girls than a teacher does, I think that also just adds another layer of competition in terms of like, oh, well, who is that person close to? Who is that person favoriting? And I think that for Colette herself, I think that there's something just infinitely compelling about the unstructured nature of what her relationship is to these girls, but specifically to Addie. And I think that within that kind of scriptless relationship, there's something really freeing and exciting, and something beyond what she gets in her home life or extracurricular activities.
Right. Because, well, her home life, she's a mother. So how do you think that impacts her? Or because she is sort of mothering these girls, but she's also actually a mother, but doesn't seem as interested in actually mothering her own child sometimes?
Yes. I think that it's interesting to think about what Colette's mothering strategy is, if she is in fact mothering the girls. I think that with the girls, she's really trying to dispel any notions of grandeur. She's trying to both take them down, and also simultaneously like make them strong. It's like a really like two-pronged approach. Beat them to the ground and then show them they can still stand up. And I think that for her own child, I mean, she's a young mom. And I feel like there are a lot of theories as to why she had a child. I think that oftentimes one can get to a point in a relationship where it feels like a child is a way of, you know, enlivening the relationship or the logical next step. But whatever the reason was that she chose to have a child, I don't believe that it came from deeply wanting one. And I think that then there's like the very complicated relationship of being a reluctant mother. And I think that this is something that actually is getting a lot more press these days. There's been a lot of interesting articles in like the New Yorker and the New York Times about mothers who love their children, but who don't want to be mothers. And the deeply complicated and painful situation that it is to have a child that you kind of wish you didn't have, but you still desperately and deeply love. And I think especially given Colette's own relationship to being a woman and her relationship to the girls on her squad, I think that she probably fears deeply for that child's
and it's
growth.
a question we would never even ask of a male character who's a father. We would never talk about his fathering skills. So we wanted to play with that. Like, we wanted to treat Colette like most shows treat male characters. Yeah. So, and that was and it was so great how much Willa would lead into that. It was, you know, a lot of, when we were looking for someone to play the coach, a lot of them were just too warm and too smiling and too giving, and we're doing that mothering thing, and Willa just instinctively got that this was not how Colette operates.
Well, because Colette's a competitor, and I think when you look at the world of cheerleading, it is so competitive, and there's no like pro league for cheerleaders, so you have all of that energy, and then it's just like, what do I do, coach? Or you can't go get an office job after that, you know what I mean?
Yes.
I think there's something like deeply disorienting about moving from being the top girl, who Colette was, the star of the show, to being the person who's on the sidelines orchestrating the whole thing. You go from being the center of attention to being the person who's pulling the strings, but it's not the same experience. You don't have the same high that you get.
Yeah.
I made it to episode 5, so I think I'm one episode ahead of where people are. Two ahead. And it's a beautiful episode, and I want to talk about it so that when you guys get there, you'll know, because you explore different point of views in that episode, and I thought it was a really cool way to tell the story. So why was that something you guys wanted to do?
Yeah, it was something we talked about a lot because we play with point of view quite a bit on the show. We start the show mostly with Addie, and then we slowly build out Colette and Beth's point of view, and we really wanted to sort of keep turning the story around, so you can't really decide who the heroes or the villains are, because no one's really a hero or a villain. So we wanted to sort of upturn people's expectations of the characters by seeing them from the outside. You know, Beth, the mean girl on the squad, looks very different when in that episode we spend some time with her and what the world looks like from her point of view. And same with Colette, when you feel the pressures that are on her in that episode, that finally we realize, oh my God, Colette, this is really hard.
That's why she's smoking in her office. Like, I get it.
I'm smoking too. I'm just smoking just watching it. So that was the idea, is that we would start to, things aren't so simple as they appear. So.
And Taveeta, I'm interested, have you had any feedback from people so far on social media or other cheerleaders or people watching the show? Because it does seem like a show that like is so social.
Oh no, absolutely. The feedback's been amazing. Like I often like just scroll through Twitter and I see all the GIFs that are being made and all the theories that are being said. So I'm really happy with it. I know all of us, we worked so hard and all of us are extremely happy with the turnout. And you guys are only on episode 3. Like there's so much juice coming.
I like that you said there's theories, so people are out there guessing.
Yeah.
Because it is a murder mystery.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not really a spoiler.
No.
I didn't want to get too
Something's
much into that because there's like,
Yeah.
it's so easy to spoil things. So I'm like
Yes.
trying not to get into it. But it is a murder mystery. So there are theories you've seen out there.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because especially when a novel comes to the screen, sometimes in the past we've seen it done before where things are changed. So I think a lot of the theories are stemming from what is Megan gonna change? And so kind of playing with that and around the death, which obviously we can't get too much into, but yeah, so it's exciting.
Did you deviate a lot from the book?
It's a bigger palette, so there more happens. The core, I mean, it's always the core is the triangle among the 3 women, and we remain true to that. But a lot of, we have because we're going home with Colette, we're getting more of her life. We definitely sort of peer behind the curtains where the book is very limited, and that's really really fun. I mean, one of the pleasures in seeing the fan response has been their delight in that triangle, and who they want to be, together and who they want out of that triangle in terms of their, it's often so either you're an Addie or a Beth or you're a Colette, and it feels like a lot of that is,
But I don't trust any of them.
nor should you.
That's why I love it. I was like, I actually don't choose any of you. Like, I think you could all be like double agents. I don't know what's happening. That's what keeps me on board. We'll go to the audience really quickly before I spoil anything because I want to get into it. So we have 2 questions. Who's first? Right here.
For Taveeta and Willa, what do you like most about your Dare Me roles compared to your past projects?
Like I said earlier, Riri's she's very vibrant. She's very fun, and this is the first project that I've gotten to play such a wild character in that nature. And as the series progresses, there is a lovely shift to Riri, and the range that I was able to explore on this show is phenomenal. So I thank Megan for that one. So I think that would definitely have to be the best part about the role. It's just the range that I've gotten to play.
I think for Colette, I mean, it's exciting to get to play a coach. It's exciting to get to play a full-grown adult with a child and a husband, which I believe is, well, I've had children on shows before, but this is the first like really solidly adult that I've played. And it's also fun to play that in the context of being a high school coach. There's a lot of like juiciness there, which is part of the character herself. And I also I love a repressed character. What can I say?
So repressed. That also made me think back to my high school experience. And I was like, oh, there always is that teacher who is just like too comfortable. They were maybe only like 23 or 24, hadn't quite figured it out yet, and just were blurring all sorts of lines. It's a very real event. Yes. And who has our next one?
Hi, I was wondering, what was your favorite scene to film?
I think we can tease to something without spoiling it.
Actually, Megan and I were just talking about this earlier. So my favorite scene will be in episode 5. So I obviously can't give anything away. But it was really fun. And I think after you watch that scene, you're going to be like, well, how was that fun for you?
Really?
But it was really fun. So episode 5.
One of my favorite, I don't know what my favorite scene is, but one of my favorite scenes is definitely in this coming week's episode 4. I have a really fun scene with Rob Heaps, who plays my husband on the show. That is just a very long scene, and it's really getting into like some of the guts of their relationship and their marriage. And Rob and I just had so much fun working together, and we rehearsed this scene like on our own in my apartment because we were like so excited to do it. And so that was definitely like one of the most fun scenes to shoot that I can think of off the top of my head.
One of my favorites, and I'll just tease it because it's not till episode 8, is actually with Willa and Horizon, who plays Addie. There's a scene in the rain that's quite beautiful, and I thought was so emotional. And they shot it. We thought it was going to be very complicated, outside in the rain. You have to have a rain machine, but it was like perfect immediately, and it's sort of beautiful and a very intense moment in the show. So that will be near and dear to me.
I do want to shout out Horizon and Marlo. They're so great
Yes.
on this show. I talked to Horizon a couple weeks ago, and I was just like, good for you, girl. Like,
Yeah.
it is that relationship, that friendship is so lived in and feels super relatable.
Yeah.
So the casting, great job.
Yes,
Yeah.
great chemistry.
Yeah,
everyone had.
everybody. I mean, it's such a fun show. Like I said, if you love that sort of like seedy underbelly of high school girl experience, check this show out. It is worth the ride. Congrats on it. I love it. Can't wait to see how everything works out in season 1. In the meantime, Dare Me airs Sundays at 10 p.m. on USA. Put your hands together for Megan Abbott, Willa Fitzgerald, and Taveeta Szymanowicz.